Welcome back, guys. Now in this video let's discuss about a very important topic for your exam, which is called as hypoxia. Okay, hypoxia. So what exactly do I mean by hypoxia? Hypoxia word means what? Hypo means less, oxia means oxygen. So it's a decrease oxygen supply to tissues. Means enough amount of oxygen is not going to your tissues. Okay, enough amount of oxygen is not getting delivered to your tissues. So what happens? Without oxygen you cannot produce ATP. Without ATP cells cannot survive, they will die. So what are the most important single line question? Most sensitive cell. Okay, most sensitive cell to hypoxia. Neurons. Okay, neurons, especially which neurons? Purkinje cells. Purkinje cells in your cerebellum. Okay, it's the Purkinje cells in your cerebellum. These neurons are most sensitive to hypoxia. If you don't find this, the striatum in the basal ganglia, the striatal region. Okay, caudate plus putamen. Okay, the striatum of basal ganglia. These are the most sensitive structures for hypoxia. What is the most resistant structure for hypoxia? Which cells are most resistant for hypoxia? The most resistant cells are your fibroblasts. Okay, these are the most resistant cells. Now having said that, how many types of hypoxia are there? Okay, there are 4 types of hypoxia which you need to know for your exam. There are 4 types. What are these 4 types of hypoxia? One is hypoxic hypoxia. Next, anemic hypoxia, stagnant hypoxia, also called as ischemic hypoxia. Okay, and last one is histotoxic hypoxia. So these are the 4 different types of hypoxia. Okay, these are the 4 different types of hypoxia. Now to have a better understanding, you need to know a certain basic things, like a certain normal basic physiology, like the basic physiology about oxygen, hemoglobin, partial pressure of oxygen, dissolved oxygen, like oxyhemoglobin. You need to know certain things. Okay, if you know the basics, you can understand better about these different types of hypoxia. So first I am going to explain you the basic thing. Okay, basic physiology. Now look here. Here I am showing you a alveolus. This is your alveoli. Okay. Now here is your circulatory system. Now I am showing here, this is your circulatory system. On one side I am showing you the arterial side. This is the arterial side, and this side I am showing with the blue color, which means this is venous side. Arterial side and venous side. Okay. Now here, this is the area where I am showing you the tissues. Okay, here is the area of the tissues. They take the oxygen. Now where is oxygen present? Now oxygen is present here in the alveolus. What is the partial pressure of oxygen? The partial pressure of oxygen in the alveolus is 104 mmHg. 104 mmHg. Or you can simply, for easy understanding purpose, you can say 100 mmHg. Okay, round figures. I am taking round figures so that it will be easy for you. 100 mmHg, partial pressure of oxygen in the alveolus. What is the partial pressure of oxygen in the tissue? Partial pressure of oxygen at the level of tissues is 40 mmHg. Okay, so now this oxygen which is present in your alveolus, it should be delivered to your tissues. It should be delivered to your tissues, and it's very easy, you know. Here the partial pressure is more, 100 mmHg, and here the partial pressure is 40 mmHg. So just by a simple diffusion, oxygen is going to move from the high partial pressure to the low partial pressure just because of simple diffusion from high partial pressure to low partial pressures. Very simple. Okay. So in how many ways this oxygen will be transported to the tissues? So how exactly oxygen is transported to the tissue? Okay. So I'm going to explain you that basic physiology. Now after that we can have a better understanding about different types of hypoxia. Okay. Now first look at the venous blood. In the venous blood, okay, I am taking 1 deciliter. Okay, 1 deciliter, that is 100 ml of which blood? Venous blood. In 100 ml of this venous blood, how much hemoglobin is there? Hemoglobin is 15 grams of hemoglobin is there. Okay, in an adult male who is weighing 70 kilograms, he is absolutely alright. How much hemoglobin is there? 15 grams of hemoglobin is there. Okay. Now, what about this hemoglobin saturation? This hemoglobin saturation is 75% saturated. Hemoglobin molecule is 75% saturated. That's normal. Hemoglobin saturation in the venous blood is 75% saturation. Okay. And how much oxygen is present? Content of oxygen in the venous blood. Content of oxygen in the venous blood is 15 ml. 15 ml oxygen is there. Okay. So hemoglobin saturation is 75%. Okay, let me write here percentage saturation. This is saturation. Hemoglobin saturation. 75%. How much oxygen is there? 15 ml of oxygen is there. And what is the partial pressure of oxygen here? The partial pressure of oxygen in the venous blood. Partial pressure of oxygen in the venous blood is 40 mmHg. These are constants. Okay. Now, this venous blood, look, this venous blood, it is coming, okay, it is coming to the lungs in the pulmonary capillaries. So what happens? Now what happens? See here, this is the hemoglobin molecule coming. This is the deoxygenated hemoglobin, not oxygenated hemoglobin, because this is venous blood. Now here, look, this is one hemoglobin molecule. Okay. So one hemoglobin molecule can carry 4 molecules of oxygen. This is one hemoglobin molecule. It can carry 4 molecules of oxygen. 4 molecules of oxygen. But this is venous blood. So it is 75% saturated. This hemoglobin is 75% saturated. So here it is carrying how many molecules of oxygen? It is carrying only 3 molecules of oxygen. So 75% saturated. Hemoglobin is, okay, 75% hemoglobin saturated. Okay. Now what happens? Now, what about the partial pressure of oxygen here? The partial pressure of oxygen in the venous blood is 40 mmHg. Here it is 100 mmHg. So, what happens? So, immediately oxygen will diffuse, okay, into the pulmonary capillaries from high partial pressure to the low partial pressure. Oxygen is going to diffuse. When oxygen is diffusing, now you should know, when oxygen is diffusing, now 3% of the oxygen, 3% of the oxygen is going to dissolve, okay, in plasma. So this 3% of the oxygen is going to dissolve in the plasma. So when this 3% of the oxygen out of the 100% oxygen which is diffused, out of 100% oxygen which is diffused, 3% of the oxygen is dissolved in plasma. So because of this dissolved oxygen, okay, I am writing DO2. Because of this dissolved oxygen, what happened to the partial pressure? Now the partial pressure of oxygen becomes 100 mmHg. The exact value is 97. It becomes 97. Okay, it is increasing because now it's happening, right? Actually first it will become 100, later it will become 97. But final thing I am telling you, the partial pressure of oxygen in arterial blood, okay, first, okay, let me say easy values, 100 mmHg, but first it becomes 100 mmHg. Okay, now the first point which I wanted to know is Because of this dissolved oxygen, how much dissolved oxygen? 3% of the oxygen. What happened to the partial pressure? Partial pressure increased from 40, it increased to 100. Now this 100 mmHg is more partial pressure is there. Now more partial pressure is there. Now whenever more partial pressure is there, now this hemoglobin, only now this hemoglobin, okay, only now this hemoglobin, what happened to this hemoglobin? This hemoglobin, it is going to accept, okay, when the partial pressure is more, now it is going to accept this fourth oxygen molecule. Now hemoglobin is becoming oxyhemoglobin. Okay, now hemoglobin is accepting the oxygen molecules. It's just like hemoglobin Hb. Okay, hemoglobin Hb, I used to remember it like hemoglobin is like husband. Okay, he's like a boy. Now the oxygen is like a wife. When the husband is going to accept the wife, okay, whenever she is bringing more dowry. So here the concept which I want you to know is this partial pressure of oxygen is like a dowry. Okay, partial pressure, when the partial pressure is more, whenever the partial pressure increases, now hemoglobin accepts the oxygen and becomes oxyhemoglobin. Okay, now all the hemoglobin in the arterial blood, becomes oxygenated. 100% hemoglobin becomes oxygenated. Okay, to be very frank, how much percent hemoglobin is oxygenated? 97% of the hemoglobin is oxygenated, because some venous blood will mix in the heart, from the cardiac vein, some deoxygenated blood from the heart will mix, so that little, like, saturation decreases. But at the end of the day, I should say, okay, at the end of the day, I am telling you how much hemoglobin is now with the oxyhemoglobin, how much? 97% of your hemoglobin in the arterial blood. 97% of the hemoglobin in the arterial blood, it is oxyhemoglobin, because the hemoglobin is accepting oxygen. Why hemoglobin is accepting oxygen? Because partial pressure increases. So from this I can say, whenever partial pressure increases, whenever the partial pressure of oxygen increases, what happened to the saturation of hemoglobin? Hemoglobin saturation also increases. Okay, 97%. Hemoglobin saturation also increases. Whenever partial pressure is more, hemoglobin saturation also increases. 97% of your hemoglobin is saturated. Oxyhemoglobin. Only 3% is deoxyhemoglobin. Means even in arterial blood, there is deoxyhemoglobin, because of the mixture of some venous blood, from in the heart. Okay, deoxyhemoglobin is how much? Only 3%. Okay, now I am writing the values in the arterial blood. Here I am writing, sir, in the arterial blood, how much hemoglobin is there? Hemoglobin is 15 grams. 15 grams of hemoglobin is there. This much hemoglobin is there in 100 ml. 15 grams in 100 ml of arterial blood in 1 deciliter. Okay. Now one hemoglobin molecule is accepting how many molecules of oxygen? Hemoglobin is 75%, sorry, not 75%, sorry, 100% saturated. Okay, 100% saturated. Hemoglobin is 100% saturated, means one hemoglobin molecule is accepting 4 molecules of oxygen. Okay, and how much hemoglobin percentage? Okay, how much hemoglobin percentage is with, that is I should say oxyhemoglobin. Okay, how much is oxyhemoglobin? 97% of the hemoglobin is oxyhemoglobin. And what is the partial pressure of oxygen in the arterial blood? Partial pressure of oxygen is 100 mmHg. So these are the parameters which I want you to know in the arterial blood. In the arterial blood, these are the things which I want you to know. So the first thing, what happens is, here partial pressure of oxygen is 100. And what is the partial pressure of oxygen in the tissues? 40. So when this arterial blood is coming like this into the capillaries, here the partial pressure is 100, here it is 40. Now tell me, this partial pressure is because of what? The partial pressure is because of dissolved oxygen. The partial pressure is because of dissolved oxygen, not oxyhemoglobin. 3% of the oxygen is a dissolved oxygen. Rest of the oxygen is oxyhemoglobin. Rest of the oxygen is binding with the hemoglobin. 3% is dissolved, other 97% is binding with the hemoglobin. Okay, 97% of the oxygen is binding with the hemoglobin. That is oxyhemoglobin. Now, what happens according to the simple diffusion? Now this dissolved oxygen, okay, which is generating a pressure of 100 mmHg, the partial pressure of oxygen 100 mmHg. What it will do? It will go into the tissues. It will go into the tissues. As the oxygen, as this dissolved oxygen is going into the tissues, what happened to the partial pressure? Now the partial pressure, it becomes partial pressure. Now it becomes partial pressure of oxygen becomes 40. Partial pressure of oxygen is becoming 40 because here you can't change. It's always 40. So when the partial pressure is decreasing, look, when the partial pressure is decreasing, okay, when the partial pressure decreases, what happened to the hemoglobin? Now the hemoglobin, now when the partial pressure is decreasing, it will release the oxygen to the tissues. Whenever dowry is not there, husband is going to just kick the wife out. So in the same way, this hemoglobin, whenever the partial pressure is decreasing, partial pressure is the determinant, it's a dowry, it's the real determinant. When partial pressure is more, hemoglobin binds with the oxygen. When partial pressure is less, hemoglobin releases the oxygen. Now when the partial pressure is decreasing here, okay, when the partial pressure decreasing here, what happened to this last oxygen molecule? The fourth oxygen molecule is going to be released into the tissues. So this oxygen, only this oxygen will be released into the tissues. Again hemoglobin is becoming how much percent saturated? 75%. Means one hemoglobin molecule again is going to bind with only 3 molecules of oxygen. 1 molecule of oxygen is delivered. So at the end of the day, the point which I want you to know is, partial pressure is determined by dissolved oxygen. Partial pressure is more means hemoglobin saturation is going to be more. Partial pressure is more means oxyhemoglobin is going to be more. Okay, this is the point which I want you to know. Now, in arterial blood, see here how much, one more thing which I forgot here is how much, what is the content of oxygen, means how much content of oxygen is there. Okay, not carbon dioxide, how much oxygen is there in the arterial blood. In 100 ml of arterial blood, in 1 deciliter of arterial blood, that's 100 ml, 20 ml of oxygen is present, 20 ml of oxygen is present. How much oxygen is present in the venous blood? 15 ml. So how much oxygen is going to the tissues? How much oxygen will be taken by the tissues? Every minute, how much oxygen your tissues will take? 5 ml. 5 ml of oxygen will be taken by your tissues from 100 ml of arterial blood. Okay, if 100 ml of arterial blood is going like this, means from that 100 ml arterial blood, okay, how much they will take? 5 ml of oxygen. Okay, blood is going, arterial blood is going, they will take 5 ml. So here 20 is there, 20 ml of oxygen is going, 20 ml of oxygen going means out of the 20 ml, 5 ml they will take. So how much is left over? 15 ml of oxygen is there in 100 ml of venous blood. Okay, so this is what I want you to know. This is a basic thing which I want you to know. Now if you understand this, okay, there are 3 levels. One is at the level of your lungs. The second level is your blood, that is hemoglobin. The third level is your tissues, which are taking the oxygen. So there are 3 levels. At these 3 levels, you can have problems that can lead to hypoxia. Okay, now let's discuss about one by one. The first type of hypoxia which I am going to discuss here is hypoxic hypoxia. The first type of hypoxia is hypoxic hypoxia. In the name itself it's there is hypoxic condition which is leading to hypoxia. In an easy word I can say there is some problem with the partial pressure of oxygen. In this condition the partial pressure of oxygen is going down. So the partial pressure of oxygen in the arterial blood is decreasing. So there is less oxygen in the arterial blood. Less oxygen, first of all in the arterial blood there is less oxygen, that's why there is less oxygen going to the tissues. So there is hypoxemia. Okay, hypoxemia means less oxygen in the blood. Hypoxemia is there. Okay, so hypoxic hypoxia mein hypoxemia is there. Partial pressure of oxygen is reduced. What might be the reason? Why? What might be the reason? Examples can include high altitudes. Okay, in high altitudes. Now, when you go to high altitudes, what happened to the partial pressure of oxygen? In high altitude, partial pressure of oxygen is going to be less. Okay, the content of oxygen is going to be less over there. So automatically, if outside if it is less means, automatically inside is also going to be less. Okay, so outside there is problem. The partial pressure of oxygen in the high altitude is going to be less. So automatically the partial pressure of oxygen in your body is also going to be less. Okay, so high altitudes is reason number 1. Next is pulmonary fibrosis. Okay, pulmonary fibrosis, which means, for example, look here, here is your alveolus, here is alveolus, and this is the capillary, this is the blood. Okay, now the oxygen, it have to come like this, the oxygen have to diffuse. Now what if there is pulmonary fibrosis, there is increasing in the thickness of the membrane, pulmonary fibrosis, fixed principle, if there is increase in the thickness of the membrane, diffusion decreases. Now in pulmonary fibrosis, the thickness of the alveolar basement membranes is increasing. So diffusion decreases. So what happened to the partial pressure of oxygen here? Less oxygen is coming into the blood. So what happened to the partial pressure of oxygen? The partial pressure of oxygen is going to decrease. Okay. So the second reason number 2 for hypoxic hypoxia is high altitudes, and the reason number 2 is pulmonary fibrosis. The reason number 3 is right to left shunt. Right to left shunts. Right to left shunt means the venous blood is mixing with arterial blood. Okay, venous blood is mixing with arterial blood. When the venous blood means deoxygenated blood. Venous blood have less things. Oxygen is going to be less, saturation is going to be less. Okay, you know the thing. So when the venous blood is mixing with the arterial blood, again that can decrease the partial pressure of oxygen, because venous blood is mixing with the arterial blood. In normal arterial blood, partial pressure of oxygen is 100, but if you mix it with the venous blood, the partial pressure of oxygen is going to decrease. Okay, so right to left shunt, which can be seen in the 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐫𝐞 syndrome. Okay, so at the end of the day, the main point which I want you to know for your exam is, sir, hypoxic hypoxia. In this, the partial pressure of oxygen is going to be less. The partial pressure of oxygen in the arterial blood is going to decrease. Seen with high altitudes, this is the one point which I want you to know. Okay. Now, other parameters, how they are going to change. First, right, the partial pressure of oxygen is decrease. PaO₂. If the partial pressure of oxygen is less means, can I say something like this? Partial pressure of oxygen is because of dissolved oxygen, 3% dissolved oxygen. If I am saying partial pressure of oxygen is less means, what about the dissolved oxygen? Automatically, dissolved oxygen is also going to be less. Okay. Dissolved oxygen is also less. Okay. Now, if it's a partial pressure, it's a dowry. Okay. So if dowry is more, hemoglobin is going to accept the oxygen, becomes 100% saturated. If the partial pressure of oxygen is less means, what about the hemoglobin saturation? Okay, what about the hemoglobin saturation? The saturation also decreases. It's the partial pressure which determines the saturation. More partial pressure means more saturation. Less partial pressure means less saturation. So what happens to the saturation? So saturation of oxygen in the arterial blood also decreases. SaO2, saturation of oxygen also decreases. Saturation is not going to be now 100%. Now, can I say something like this? If saturation is going down, automatically oxyhemoglobin, hemoglobin bound oxygen, that is oxyhemoglobin, is also decreasing, because partial pressure is less. If partial pressure is less, now hemoglobin is not going to bind with oxygen, so amount of oxygen, the oxyhemoglobin, is also going down. Okay. Now tell me, what happens to the content of oxygen in the arterial blood? Now what happened to the total content of oxygen in the arterial blood? The total content of oxygen in the arterial blood decrease, because everything is decreasing. The content of oxygen in the arterial blood is decreasing because partial pressure is less. The pulmonary fibrosis, oxygen is not coming. Okay, the partial pressure of oxygen is going to be less. Outside oxygen is not there, so inside oxygen is not there. Simple. So content of oxygen in the arterial blood is less. Okay. Now, for example, let's say, now here is a capillary. Okay. How much is the input? Normally, in a normal condition, arterial blood is bringing 100 ml of arterial blood is bringing 20 ml of oxygen. Out of this 20 ml, 5 ml will be utilized by the tissues. 5 ml will be utilized by the tissues. How much is going to be going back? 15 ml of oxygen is still present in the venous blood. Okay, 15 ml of oxygen is still present in the venous blood. Now, what happened? Now, the content of oxygen in the arterial blood is decreasing. Maybe from 20 it decreases. Okay, maybe from 20 it decreases. But your tissues always, this is constant, your tissues doesn't matter, they always require 5 ml. So they are going to grab the 5 ml. Okay, so they are going to take the 5 ml. Now, what happened to the venous blood? This is also going to decrease. The amount of oxygen in the venous blood, it's going to decrease. It's not going to be 15 ml now. It's going to decrease. Okay, so amount of oxygen in the arterial blood is decreasing. From 20 it decreases to maybe 15, and from 15 here it might decrease to 10 ml. Here it is decreasing to 15 ml. Means decreasing, both are decreasing. Okay, so as both are decreasing, means the content of oxygen in the arterial blood is decreasing and content of oxygen in the venous blood both decreases. So if you see here, hypoxic hypoxia, everything is decreasing. Okay, partial pressure of oxygen decreases. Okay, partial pressure of oxygen decreases. Dissolved oxygen decreases. Saturation of oxygen decreases. Oxyhemoglobin decreases. Content of oxygen in the arterial blood decreases. Content of oxygen in the venous blood decreases. But here the content of oxygen in the arterial and venous blood, they are decreasing in the same proportion. Okay, they are decreasing in the same proportion. So what happened to arteriovenous oxygen difference? Okay, in a normal healthy person में arterial blood have 20, venous blood have 15. So what is the difference? 5. The difference is 5 in a normal person. Now in our condition, in hypoxic hypoxia, it becomes 15 here. Arterial blood oxygen content becomes 15. Venous blood oxygen contents become 10. So what is the difference now? 5, same. So in hypoxic hypoxia, the content of oxygen in the arterial blood and the content of oxygen in the venous blood, they are decreasing in the same proportion. So arteriovenous oxygen difference remains same. Okay, so arteriovenous oxygen difference remains same. So these are the important points which I want you to know regarding hypoxic hypoxia. Again, I am telling you, in hypoxic hypoxia, the problem is with partial pressure of oxygen is decreasing, seen in high altitudes. Outside oxygen is not available, so inside oxygen is not available. So partial pressure of oxygen decreases. Okay, so partial pressure decreases, so saturation decreases, oxyhemoglobin decreases, the content decreases, everything decreases. So finally, if it is more severe, the tissues will get hypoxia. But arteriovenous difference is going to be same. Okay, now let's discuss about the second type of hypoxia, that is anemic hypoxia. So if you want to remember with one single word, in anemic hypoxia, yes, of course hypoxia is there, but why hypoxia? The problem is with the second level, that's the problem is with hemoglobin. Problem is something problem with hemoglobin. What kind of problem? Maybe the quantitative problem. Quantitative problem means hemoglobin is decreasing, that is anemia. Enough amount of hemoglobin is there, so enough amount of oxygen is not getting delivered to the tissues. So anemic hypoxia, quantitative problem. Or you can have qualitative problem. Qualitative problem means the quality of the hemoglobin is affected. Quality of the hemoglobin is affected. Now it's a bad hemoglobin. For example, now it becomes now methemoglobin. Okay, or this hemoglobin is binding with some other agent, that is carbon monoxide. Now it's not normal hemoglobin, it is carboxyhemoglobin. It's binding with carbon monoxide. So it's not, there is no place for oxygen to bind, so oxygen is not going to the tissues. So what are the causes? What are the causes of anemic hypoxia? The cause of anemic hypoxia is anemia. Okay, the cause of anemic hypoxia is anemia, methemoglobin, carbon monoxide poisoning. Because carbon monoxide have 250 times more affinity. Okay, carbon monoxide it have 250 times. Okay, more affinity for hemoglobin. It's have more affinity for hemoglobin. So there is no place for oxygen to go and bind with the hemoglobin. So oxygen is not delivered to the tissues. Okay, so oxygen is not delivered to the tissues. So in anemic hypoxia, okay, oxygen is going into your blood, no doubt. Oxygen is getting dissolved into your blood. But the problem is with hemoglobin. Oxygen is dissolved, oxygen is diffused, and oxygen is getting dissolved. So there is no problem with the diffusion. Outside oxygen is okay, outside there is no problem, and oxygen is getting dissolved. So what happened to the partial pressure of oxygen? The partial pressure of oxygen in your arterial blood is going to be normal. Okay, normal. So the partial pressure of oxygen is normal means, what about the dissolved oxygen? Dissolved oxygen is going to be absolutely normal. Okay, so dissolved oxygen is normal. If dissolved oxygen is normal means, okay, partial pressure normal, dissolved oxygen normal. If partial pressure is normal means saturation should be normal. So saturation of oxygen, okay, the saturation of saturated oxygen, okay, is going to be absolutely normal. Okay, oxygen saturation is going to be normal. Okay, but in one condition which is called as carbon monoxide poisoning. Okay, in carbon monoxide poisoning, to hemoglobin who is binding? Carbon monoxide is going. So though everything is normal, though partial pressure is normal, if normal partial pressure is there means hemoglobin have to bind with oxygen. But in this condition mein partial pressure normal hai, partial pressure of oxygen is more. Okay, normal, everything is good, but still here the hemoglobin is binding with carbon monoxide. So in this carbon monoxide poisoning exception, in this carbon monoxide poisoning, what about the saturation of oxygen? Saturation of oxygen, or I should say the saturation of the hemoglobin. Okay, the saturation of hemoglobin is going to decrease. Okay. Okay, this is the only exception. So that's why I'm just keeping it side. So normal, let's say partial pressure of oxygen is normal. For example, let's take anemia. Partial pressure of oxygen is normal. Dissolved oxygen is also going to be normal. Saturation of oxygen is normal. Okay, so what happened to the oxygen binding to hemoglobin? Oxygen binding to hemoglobin, 𝐒𝐲𝐫𝐞, this is going to be decreased. This is the problem. The problem lies here. Everything is okay, but the amount of hemoglobin is less. The amount of hemoglobin is less. That's why 𝐒𝐲𝐫𝐞 is also going to be less. Okay, though everything is okay. See, saturation here means 1 molecule of hemoglobin is binding with 4 molecules of oxygen. It's binding with 4 molecules of oxygen. Okay, there is no problem with the hemoglobin per se. Hemoglobin is absolutely alright. Means, I'm talking about anemic condition. Hemoglobin, the quality is alright. It is binding with, but the amount of hemoglobin is less. The quantity of hemoglobin is less. That's why anemic. So, amount of �ऑक्सीhemoglobin is going to be less in the arterial blood. Normally, I told you how much amount of �ऑक्सीhemoglobin is there. 97% �ऑक्सीhemoglobin is there. 3% is the deoxyhemoglobin in arterial blood. Now that decreases. Okay, now that decreases. So what happened to content of oxygen in arterial blood? Content of oxygen is going to decrease because less hemoglobin is there. So less oxygen is there. So content of oxygen decreases. So what happens? Content of oxygen in the venous blood. Arterial blood may less. And venous blood may also going to be less. Okay, because tissues will take 5 ml constantly. Okay, arterial blood may, it is decreasing. 5 ml will be going to the tissues and venous blood may also going to decrease. Okay, so content of oxygen in the arterial blood and content of oxygen in the venous blood both are going to decrease, but in same proportion. So what happened to arteriovenous oxygen difference? It's going to be normal. Okay, arteriovenous oxygen difference is going to be normal in 2 conditions. What are the 2 conditions? In hypoxic hypoxia, arteriovenous oxygen difference is same, maintained. In anemic hypoxia, arteriovenous oxygen difference is going to be same because the content of oxygen in the arterial blood and the content of oxygen in the venous blood both decrease proportionately. Okay, so at the end of the day, what are the important points which you should know regarding the anemic hypoxia? In anemic hypoxia, the problem is with the hemoglobin. The amount of hemoglobin is going to be less. That's why anemic. There is no problem with the partial pressure. So partial pressure of oxygen is normal. The dissolved oxygen is normal. The percentage saturation of the hemoglobin. Okay, percentage saturation of the hemoglobin is normal. So saturated oxygen is normal. But what is the problem? The amount of oxyhemoglobin is decreased. Okay, the amount of oxyhemoglobin is decreased. So automatically content of oxygen decreases. Content of oxygen in the venous blood and arterial blood decreases. Okay, so completed. Now the next type of hypoxia which I want you to know is stagnant hypoxia. Okay, stagnant hypoxia. See here, what's the problem? Stagnant means stasis. Okay, means the blood flow is sluggish, the blood is going slowly. So problem is with flow of blood. Okay, problem is with the flow. Velocity means how much blood is going through the tissue bed in a minute. Okay, problem is with the flow of blood. Now why blood is going slowly? If the blood is going slowly means not enough amount of blood is going, not enough amount of oxygen is going, so hypoxia will develop. Now why there is a problem with the flow of the blood? Maybe he is having weak heart, so congestive heart failure. Okay, congestive heart failure, or he is having shock. Okay, shock. In shock condition there will be hypoperfusion. Means less amount of blood is going to the tissues. Shock can lead to hypoxia, true. That's stagnant hypoxia. Okay. Now in this condition, what's the problem? See, there is no problem with the outside environment. Partial pressure of oxygen is in the environment is normal. The partial pressure of oxygen in the lungs is normal. Everything is normal. So there is no problem. The problem here is with the heart. The heart is unable to contract properly. The heart is unable to pump the blood properly. Everything is okay. Hemoglobin is okay. Okay. So in this condition, partial pressure of oxygen in the arterial blood is normal. So what about the dissolved oxygen? Dissolved oxygen is going to be normal. So what about the saturation of oxygen? Saturated oxygen, normal. Means 1 molecule of hemoglobin is binding with 4 molecules of oxygen. What happened to the oxyhemoglobin? Hemoglobin, there is no problem. And what happened to the amount of oxyhemoglobin? It's also going to be normal. Everything is normal. Okay. What about content of oxygen in the arterial blood? Normal. Okay. So now look here carefully. See, here is a capillary. This is arterial side. Here is the arterial side. Here is the venous side. Now here I am showing you the venous side. Now what are these things? Here are the tissues. Okay. Now in this condition, what is the content of oxygen in the arterial blood? It is, 20 ml. 20 ml of oxygen is present in 1 deciliter of arterial blood. This 20 is coming like this. Now here the flow is sluggish. Flow is reduced. Flow is going slowly. Okay, not enough amount of blood is going slowly. So as the blood is going up slowly, the more time the blood is staying here. The more the time the blood is staying here. The more the time the blood is staying here. Normally it was supposed these tissues, they were supposed to take how much? 5 ml. They were supposed to take 5 ml of oxygen. Okay, as the blood is staying in this place for a lot of time, not enough amount of blood is coming. The tissues are suffering with hypoxia. So now they will take more oxygen. Okay, now they will extract the more oxygen from the blood. So as they are extracting more amount of oxygen, so what happened to the content of oxygen in the venous blood? It will become, as the more oxygen, now out 5, now it takes 10 ml. Now they are taking 10 ml. Now what happens here? 10 ml. So what happens to the content of oxygen in the venous blood? The content of oxygen in the venous blood is decreasing. Okay, arterial blood is normal, but the content of oxygen in the venous blood is decreasing. So CVO2, content of oxygen in the venous blood is decreasing. Okay, this is the one MCQ which I want you to know. Okay, so now what happened to arteriovenous oxygen difference? The normal arteriovenous oxygen difference is 5, 20, 15. Now here it becomes 20 and 10. So 20 minus 10 is how much? So 20 minus 10, arteriovenous difference. Now difference is increasing. Okay, the arteriovenous oxygen difference increases in this type of hypoxia called as stagnant hypoxia, where there is problem with the pump. Now after this, the last type of hypoxia which I want you to know is histotoxic hypoxia. Okay, histotoxic hypoxia. Now in the name itself it is there, again there is hypoxia is there to the tissues. Okay, hypoxia is there, less oxygen is getting going to the tissues. The problem is with the level of the tissues, there is some problem with the tissues. So problem with tissues means the tissues are unable to use the oxygen, that's why there is hypoxia. Problem is with the tissues. It's in which condition? Example, cyanide poisoning. So what the cyanide is going to do? The cyanide will inhibit complex number 4, cytochrome oxidase, complex number 4 of electron transport chain. The electron transport chain complex number 4 is inhibited. It's the electron transport chain which uses oxygen, which takes oxygen for the production of ATP. Okay, complex number 4, in the complex number 4 the electrons are accepted by the oxygen. So water is going to be formed and ATP will be produced. Okay, so the point which I want you to know is it's the complex number 4 which uses oxygen. Now in this histotoxic hypoxia condition mein, the complex number 4 is inhibited, it's not functioning. The complex number 4 is inhibited. Cyanide poisoning inhibits, right? Inhibits complex number 4. So can you use this oxygen? You can't use the oxygen. Oxygen is there in the blood, but your tissues are unable to use it. That's why histotoxic hypoxia. It's also seen in condition called as beriberi. Beriberi is due to deficiency of what? Deficiency of thiamine, vitamin B1. Okay, it's due to deficiency of B1, thiamine. So if this vitamin B1 deficiency is there, that will also affect the electron transport chain. Okay, that will also affect the mitochondria electron transport chain. So your mitochondria are unable to use the oxygen in beriberi. So now in this condition, what happened to these parameters? So there is no problem with the partial pressure of oxygen in your blood. There is no problem. Absolutely normal. PaO₂ is normal. If PaO₂ is normal, what happened to the dissolved oxygen? Normal. What happened to the saturation of the oxygen? Saturation of the oxygen, the hemoglobin saturation, it's also going to be normal. What happened to oxyhemoglobin? It's also going to be normal. Okay, oxyhemoglobin is also normal. Means 1 molecule of hemoglobin binding with 4 molecules of oxygen. Everything is normal. What happened to content of oxygen in the arterial blood? The content of oxygen in the arterial blood is also going to be normal. There is no problem. Okay, the content of oxygen is going to the content of arterial blood oxygen is decreased. In the previous one we have discussed in anemic hypoxia, enough amount of hemoglobin is not there. So what happens in anemic hypoxia? It decreases. But in this condition, it is normal. Content of oxygen in arterial blood. So what happened to content of oxygen in venous blood? This is the question. Look here, you know it. So here is the arterial blood. This is the area of the capillaries. Here is the venous blood. What is normal? 15 is coming, 20 is coming, 20 ml of oxygen is coming. Out of this 20 ml, 5 ml is extracted by the tissues. And how much is left over? 15 ml is left over. So what is the normal arteriovenous oxygen difference? 20 minus 15. What is normal? 5. But in our condition, tissues are not using oxygen. Tissues are unable to use the oxygen. So tissues are not taking the oxygen. Okay, tissues are not taking the oxygen. So if the tissues are not taking the oxygen, so now here how much oxygen will be there? 20 ml. So what happened to the difference? Difference is decreasing. There is no difference now. It should be 5. Now it is decreasing. 20. It's same. Okay. So what happened to, first of all tell me, what happened to the content of oxygen in the venous blood? The content of oxygen in the venous blood increased. So what happened to arteriovenous oxygen difference? The arteriovenous oxygen is going to be decreased. Normally it should be 5, the difference should be 5. Now there is no difference, it's the same. Okay, so these are the points which I want you to know for your exam. Okay, so these different types of hypoxia. One is hypoxic hypoxia, anemic hypoxia. Okay, hypoxic hypoxia, anemic hypoxia, histotoxic hypoxia, and stagnant hypoxia. Okay, so with this we have completed the 4 different types of hypoxia. Okay guys, after discussing about different types of hypoxia, now let's discuss about cyanosis. We all know hypoxia is going to cause a cyanosis, right? So let's see about that. Cyanosis. So what exactly is cyanosis? Cyanosis is bluish discoloration of skin and mucous membranes. It's a bluish discoloration of your skin and mucous membranes. Why? What's the problem? It's due to increased amount of deoxygenated hemoglobin. Okay, it's due to increase in the amount of deoxygenated hemoglobin. See, the amount of deoxygenated hemoglobin in the arterial blood, or the amount of deoxygenated hemoglobin is in the venous blood is increasing. The amount of this deoxygenated venous hemoglobin is increasing. Okay, more deoxygenated hemoglobin is there. So that's why the problem. Okay, that's why this bluish color discoloration. So how much should be there? How much deoxygenated hemoglobin? See, if the deoxygenated hemoglobin value, if it is more than 4 gram percentage, okay, if you have this much amount of deoxygenated hemoglobin, then cyanosis will develop. Okay, then cyanosis is going to develop. So first of all, let's see how much amount of deoxygenated hemoglobin is there in our arterial blood. Any deoxygenated hemoglobin is there? We know in arterial blood there is oxygenated hemoglobin and deoxygenated hemoglobin is there. Yes, we know. We have already discussed with you. See, arterial blood. Okay, so how much amount of oxyhemoglobin is there? 97%, you know. So this much amount of oxyhemoglobin is there. And how much is deoxyhemoglobin? Okay, how much is deoxyhemoglobin? 3%. We have discussed in the topic of hypoxia also. Okay, 97% of hemoglobin in your arterial blood is oxygenated. Okay, 3% is deoxygenated because of the mixture of a little venous blood from the coronary veins. Okay, now if I put this, for example, see in 100 ml of arterial blood, how much hemoglobin is there? 15 grams of hemoglobin is there. Out of this 15 grams, 15 grams में 3% is deoxygenated. 3% is deoxygenated. 97%. Okay, 97% is oxygenated, 3% is deoxygenated. So I should say, to calculate how much amount of deoxygenated hemoglobin is there. Array, if 15 grams में how many grams is deoxygenated hemoglobin? 15 grams में how many grams of hemoglobin is deoxygenated? So 15 into 3 by, or I should say 3%, right? 3% means 0.3. So 15 into 0.3, how much? 0.45 gram percentage, means 0.45 grams. Okay, this much is deoxygenated. Out of this 15 grams में not even 1 gram, 0.45 gram percentage of hemoglobin is deoxyhemoglobin. Okay, now what I told you, if your deoxyhemoglobin, if it is more than 4 grams, then cyanosis develops. Now for example, let's see venous blood. venous blood. In venous blood, how much oxyhemoglobin is there? How much oxyhemoglobin is there? It is 75%. Okay, 75% is oxyhemoglobin. And how much deoxyhemoglobin? It is 25%. 25% of the hemoglobin. Okay, 25% of the hemoglobin is deoxyhemoglobin. Okay, now let's put it this way. 15 into 0.25. It will be 3.75 grams. So in the venous blood, 3.75 grams of hemoglobin is deoxygenated hemoglobin. But still see here, okay, the point which I want you to know is, in arterial blood, this much amount of hemoglobin is deoxy. In venous blood, this much amount of hemoglobin is deoxyhemoglobin. Arterial blood have less deoxyhemoglobin. Venous blood have more deoxyhemoglobin. Okay, it have more deoxyhemoglobin, but still the value is not 4. Okay, still the value is not 4. Now I am not talking about arterial blood or venous blood. I am talking about the blood which is present in between, the capillaries. Okay, in the capillaries. So now in the capillaries, okay, now I am taking the mean value, average deoxyhemoglobin in the capillaries which are actually going to the tissues, okay, capillaries which are present in the tissues. Now here what I should say is 0.45 grams of deoxygenated hemoglobin. In the veins, how much is there? 3.75 grams divided by average 2. I am taking both arteries as well as veins. I am taking in between value in the capillaries, divided by 2. So how much is that? 2.1 grams of deoxygenated hemoglobin is there in the capillaries. In the capillaries, this much deoxyhemoglobin is there, average 2.1 grams. So if this value, okay, deoxygenated hemoglobin value, it's not 4 in any area. Okay, it's not 4. But what I am telling you is, if the deoxygenated hemoglobin value, if it is more than 4 gram percentage, then cyanosis will develop. Okay. Now let's see, in histotoxic hypoxia, first let's go back from the beginning. Hypoxic hypoxia. Okay, what happened to, you tell me, what happened to saturation of oxygen? What happened to saturation of oxygen in the arterial blood? In hypoxic hypoxia, you know, everything is less. The saturation of oxygen, okay, is less. Saturation of oxygen means the amount of the oxygen which is binding to the hemoglobin. It is less. So if saturation of oxygen is less, okay, and what about the saturation of oxygen in the venous blood? It is also less. See, I have discussed this thing with you. Here in hypoxic hypoxia, look, the saturation of oxygen in the arterial blood is less. Of course, the saturation of oxygen in the venous blood is also going to be less. Both the places less. So if saturation of oxygen is less means, yes, you can have cyanosis. Okay, cyanosis develops because saturation means the amount of hemoglobin binding with the oxygen is decreasing. Means the oxygen binding with the hemoglobin is decreasing. So oxyhemoglobin, I can say both this means oxyhemoglobin is decreasing. Oxyhemoglobin is decreasing. Deoxyhemoglobin is increasing because saturation is decreasing. Saturation is less means more deoxyhemoglobin. So cyanosis develops. Okay. Next, in anemic hypoxia, okay, in anemic hypoxia, there is no problem with the saturation. The saturation is normal. See, it's a problem with the hemoglobin. The amount of hemoglobin is less, but whatever hemoglobin is there, it's absolutely alright. Okay, so the saturation of hemoglobin is normal. If the saturation of hemoglobin is normal means, it means oxyhemoglobin levels are normal. Oxyhemoglobin level is normal. If oxyhemoglobin level is normal means, do you think cyanosis develops? No. No, cyanosis is not developed in anemic hypoxia. Okay, cyanosis is not going to develop in anemic hypoxia, or you can say rare, very rare. Okay, next one is stagnant hypoxia. See, in stagnant hypoxia, what happens? In stagnant hypoxia, the tissues, the flow of blood is going to be very, very slow. The blood is going very, very slowly. So, tissues are extracting as much amount of oxygen as possible. Okay, they are extracting, they are removing as much amount of oxygen as possible from the blood. So, what happened to the amount of oxygen binding with the hemoglobin? Less. So, what happened to the saturation? Especially the saturation of venous blood. Okay, the saturation of oxygen in the venous blood, the saturation of hemoglobin in the venous blood is decreasing. So, if saturation is decreasing means what happened to the deoxyhemoglobin? Deoxyhemoglobin levels increases means more deoxyhemoglobin if it is more than 4 gram percentage. Yes, cyanosis develops. Okay, cyanosis develops. Next, in histotoxic hypoxia. In histotoxic hypoxia, you tell me, what about the saturation of oxygen in the arterial blood? Saturation is normal. And what happened to the saturation of oxygen in the venous blood? It's even more saturation of oxygen, because the tissues are not using the oxygen. The tissues are not at all able to use the oxygen. So, as the tissues are not using oxygen, where the oxygen is? Oxygen is with the hemoglobin. So, oxygen is not going into the tissues. So, what happens? Do you think hemoglobin saturation decreases? No. So, what about the oxyhemoglobin? Oxyhemoglobin levels are going to be more, to be frank. More amount of oxygen is binding with the hemoglobin. So, cyanosis develops? Never. So, this is the point which I want you to know. In histotoxic hypoxia, cyanosis is not going to develop. Cyanosis will never develop. So, in histotoxic hypoxia, cyanosis is not developed. So, this is the point which I want you to know. And one thing I want to add here is anemic hypoxia. In anemic hypoxia is also because of carbon monoxide poisoning. Okay, let me write here again. Anemic hypoxia. This question you should tell me cyanosis is going to be there or not. In anemic hypoxia, this anemic hypoxia is not because of less amount of hemoglobin. This anemic hypoxia, now it is because of carbon monoxide poisoning. Now cyanosis develops? No. Because you know, in anemic hypoxia, because of carbon monoxide poisoning, what happened to the blood color? Bright red. Okay, even the skin is going to be bright red, cherry red. Okay, cherry red. Okay, so because of this, the bluish discoloration is not going to be seen. So in anemic hypoxia, the blood is going to be cherry red, bright red. Even the tissues are not going to be blue, tissues are not going to show that bluish discoloration because of this bright blood. Okay, so these are the different types of hypoxia and how cyanosis is going to be seen in a hypoxic condition, whether the cyanosis is going to be present or not. Okay, so with this we have completed the topic of hypoxia as well as cyanosis. Hope the video is helpful. Thank you.